Well, hello everybody. This is Rich Eisen, and you are at the open mic, where every week or so I sit down with an author from across the publishing spectrum to talk about their work and their experiences with publishing and writing and editing and all the good stuff that us masochists like to do in this realm. Today, I'm really thrilled. I'm joined by a really good guy. You know, I don't always know the writers that are on this show very well, but today I feel like I'm really fortunate to have somebody I know well and have a lot of love and respect for. Brandon LaGreca, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's an honor to be on your show.
Oh, well, believe me, the honor is all mine. And Brandon's not here just because he's a buddy. Brandon's here because he is an author and he has a new book out that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to the subject matter quite well. Unfortunately, in some ways, because I think we all know in this country, cancer is a really significant health issue that millions of Americans face every year. So I want to ask him, we're going to get into his background in a minute, but the thing I want to start out with is his new book, which is called Cancer, Stress, and Mindset. I read it. It's a really interesting, extremely well done read.
Thank you.
Brandon, tell us a little bit more about the book.
So, this is the second book that I've written, and this is a topic that I really wanted to cover for some time. And it harkens back to my own 2015 diagnosis of stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I'm coming at this book, one as an author, two as a cancer patient, and then three as a clinician myself who's been in private practice for 16 years in integrative medicine. And I felt like one of the things that was really lacking in the dialogue between patient and provider is this understanding of how do we think about ourselves as cancer patients? What is our mindset surrounding the diagnosis and our treatment options? And then ultimately, which I believe is the thesis of my book, is how do we leverage mindset in a way that drives outcome? And by that, I mean, there's a lot of ways we can think about the road ahead once you've received this diagnosis of cancer. But what is, and there's no magic bullet here, but what is the method that we can apply to build a resilience within ourselves and have a mindset that's going to drive positive outcome? And that's really the crux of the book and why I needed to write it, I think.
Well, I will tell you, I do think, of course, we hear all the time, attitude is everything, et cetera. And of course, when you're dealing with a major significant health crisis, attitude unto itself is not going to cure that, but it's clearly a big part of managing the day-to-day living with, and especially with cancer, where we often know the traditional treatments are so hard on the body and so hard on the spirit. It was certainly seen that having tools to manage mindset and the stress of it all would be incredibly helpful in dealing with the treatment as well as the disease.
Yeah, and that's primarily because, remember, I'm coming at this as an integrative practitioner,
Sure.
and cancer is a lifestyle disease. I mean, we've had this kind of false notion for decades now that cancer is a disease of genetics, and that is partially correct. I mean, yes, there are oncogenes that dovetail into any cancer diagnosis. And I'll give you an example of something as simple as lung cancer. If you were to talk to an oncologist in the conventional world, they would basically describe the fact that you have certain oncogenes that may predispose you to having lung cancer. And that is absolutely 100% true. But what's underlying that, which is also self-evident to practically everyone listening to this, is there are factors, environmental or otherwise, which are driving those oncogenes to produce this situation of lung cancer. And of course, the most dominant cause of that in this case would be smoking. And so that is a lifestyle choice, which is an epigenetic choice, which is acting upon our genes genetically that's causing this outcome. And so when I think about that, when I think about lifestyle as being such a massive contributor to this epigenetic disease called cancer, then I have to kind of backpedal and say, okay, so what is the patient, for instance, sitting before me? Let's say I have a new cancer patient who's coming to my clinic. What is their mindset? Because what I'm trying to derive from them is how they're thinking about the choices they have made, both leading up to this diagnosis, and then what choices they're going to make going forward, which is going to produce the best possible outcome. And the reason for that is I really want an engaged patient who's going to think about these lifestyle factors to really flesh out this kind of integrative protocol to themselves. So yes, they may be getting, all the trimmings of conventional oncology, whether it be chemotherapy, radiation, so on and so forth. But I also really need them to engage with these lifestyle principles, stress, for instance. And let's be honest. I mean, a lot of the things we do are self-destructive habits. I mean, we drink alcohol, we smoke cigarettes because they alleviate stress and depression. And those are direct carcinogenic behaviors that we have. And so again, we need to think very globally about how we interact with the world around us. And mindset is pretty key in that equation.
Well, you noted your own experience with cancer before. And so I wanted to make sure people understand that when you talk about this, you are coming from a place of very deep experience. If you don't mind, share a little bit of your story with folks so that they do understand that you do know what you're talking about here.
Yeah. So it was 2015, the winter of 2014-15, and I started getting episodes of really severe abdominal pain. They'd come maybe once a month, and then they'd get more often, maybe every few weeks. And they got bad enough to the point where I ended up into the ER, at which point they did a CT scan and they saw that what I was actually suffering from was a small bowel obstruction, where a section of my small intestine was being closed off. And what was causing that was a rather large lymph tumor. And so what was discovered at that point through various scans and tests is that I had a whole abdomen filled of lymph tumors surrounding my small intestine, the largest of which I believe was 4 inches. And so it was the small bowel obstruction that got me to get diagnosed, but then obviously I quickly dovetailed into cancer treatment at that point. And so it was simultaneously an extremely difficult thing to hear. Of course, I was 35 years old at the time. I had a 2-year-old child at home. But, and this speaks very specifically to the mindset piece, I also had this little voice in the back of my head that I can remember. My wife squeezing my hand. I see this emergency room physician telling me, "We think you have lymphoma." And this little voice in my head says, "You know what to do. You can work through this. Like there's going to be a way you can get out of this," essentially. And so I had this juxtaposition of these two thoughts. How can this possibly have happened to me? Up until this point, I felt like I was the healthiest I've ever been in terms of being a model for my patients. I was exercising, had a clean diet. And then at the same time, boom, this hit me out of nowhere. So I had this kind of almost this despair in one moment, but then also this secondary thought of, yes, but you know what to do. And so that's where it led from there. I mean, I obviously I followed some conventional oncology treatment. I didn't really go through the standard of care, as it were, but then I did flesh out a very complete integrative protocol with colleagues of mine, other naturopathic doctors, other acupuncturists, integrative medical doctors. And then over the course of the next 8 months, I instituted this program and happy to be able to report that I was in remission later that year. And I have remained so ever since. I got a scan last December and that was clear. So I'm 6 years out. I'm gonna give a massive caveat here. That does not mean I have cancer figured out. I only know what specifically worked for me, and I'm very grateful for that. This is not something that I'm cavalier about in the slightest. I will just say that it is everyone's going to have an individual journey. And, part of why I think mindset is so important is I think people have to figure that out individually and intuitively, with their caregivers, with their family and so forth. And then hopefully with that mindset piece engaged, they can make the best decisions they can for themselves. So that's kind of how it went down for me. But again, it's going to be very individual from person to person.
Well, it's certainly great to hear that you're still in remission and doing well. You look fabulous. That's all great.
Thank you.
And we've spoken a lot about your medical background. Tell me a little bit more about it, because I think, again, somebody who is very steeped in, our traditional Western medicine in particular, may struggle to understand, where you're coming from medically. So if you don't mind, I know you're an acupuncturist. I know, that your focus is mostly Eastern medicine. Give me some more background I guess the multiple medical practices that you are versed in, and you know, your approach to medicine in general.
Yeah. So my native core is in traditional Chinese medicine. And if I to answer that question, my approach to medicine in general, you know, I think a lot about environmental medicine. That's a pretty huge piece of my practice, and that's a very prominent concept theoretically within traditional Chinese medicine, as it is in most traditional forms of medicine. And that is, what are the things that we are being exposed to in our environment, and how are our bodies are a reflection of what's going on in the environment? I'll give you a small example. You know, we have conventional agricultural practices in the United States and in most Western countries that absolutely deplete and destroy the soil. And by that same token, we have also adopted medical practices and such that have really depleted the soil of our body, which in this case is the health of our intestines, and then by extension, the health of the microbiome. And so I would make that direct parallel that we are putting all these chemicals on the soil. We are ingesting those non-organic, you know, produce, for instance, and we are then depleting the health of the microbiota of our actual bodies itself. That is a very direct correlation between 1-to-1, no different than there's small particulate air pollution, and that's causing, you know, all this lung issues that we're having, even in light of this pandemic that we're experiencing right now, that we see very clearly from the research literature where there's areas where polluted areas with higher amounts of small particulate air pollution have higher severity of COVID. And so that's a massive part of how I think about health and wellness. Is we're not just individually little bubbles. We are in the context of the environmental factors that are around us. And so the health of the environment reflects the health of us. That's the external piece. Now, in traditional Chinese medicine, there's also the internal piece. And by that, I mean, what is your personal experience going through the world? What are all the emotions, stresses, the things that you are, that are being elicited in response to you just being in the world? And so that is basically the core of Chinese medicine, which is to say that we believe that there are external factors of disease, environmental triggers, and then there are internal disharmonies. And where those two things meet is the art of medicine for me, kind of teasing apart where those at. So there's this person who's being exposed to X, Y, and Z, but they're also experiencing guilt and anger and trauma from their early life. And those things kind of set the stage. They're like the seeds that will grow into any number of different disease states. And so that is my general approach to medicine, which, did you want to add to that?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry to butt in, but what in on that? What drew you to that? When someone decides, look, you know, I mean, most people go into medicine because they want to help people, right?
Yeah.
One way or another. But you have options, of course. You know, here, I mean, you could have gone traditional Western medicine. You could have,
Sure.
what you did.
Yeah.
What drew you to approaching it in the way that you ultimately did and have made into your life's work?
That's a good question. I can only say that I was exposed to acupuncture when I was 12 years old by Bill Moyers, of all people, in his PBS special called Healing of the Mind. I mean, I saw what I perceived at that seminal age, you know, a very impressionable young age, to see some pretty amazing stuff. For instance, I saw there was a patient getting brain surgery, which you have to be awake for. This patient only had a mild sedative, but all of the anesthesia that was occurring was through acupuncture with electric stimulation. And here is the patient through a translator talking to Bill Moyers, and saying that they are okay and they're not feeling any pain. And then you saw later on in that documentary that there was, you know, qigong masters, meditation masters in the parks in Beijing, and they're doing all these wild, crazy things that you would think only happen in, you know, kung fu movies. And it gave me at least the impression at that age that there's more to how we work and we work within nature that is been taught to me up until that point. And so at that moment, I had an absolute fascination with Asian culture. And Asian cultures in general tend to be more holistic in their approach. And so I think that was the core of it for me. And I think as I learned more, and I ended up studying, of course, pre-med in college, and with a focus, in biology. I also got a minor in religion and studied a lot of East Asian religions, philosophies, because to me it's like there's all this kind of the subtle aspect to life that we don't necessarily honor so much in Western culture. So for me, I think it was about living a balanced lifestyle and kind of integrating all these different concepts. And then the clear winner for me in that was traditional Chinese medicine. It's the oldest extant traditional medicine. I love the application of acupuncture. It amazes me to this day, even though I've done it for 16 years. I absolutely love applying herbal medicine and all the wonderful things that can provide. So, the modalities can change, but you're right. I think philosophically, at the end of the day, you have to kind of align yourself to whatever you groove with. And something about that just called out to me. I can only say it was there all along, maybe, and it just kind of lit itself like a fire.
Well, I asked that question because, again, I always, everything we do in this particular format, I'm thinking of how readers are going to interpret what you've written and who you are. And I think, you've given people a very good and accurate vision if they were trying to figure out, well, what might be in your book. I think you've given them a pretty good idea of what kind of person you are and what kind of perspective you have. So thank you for thoughtfully answering that question. Speaking of that, let's talk about your first book.
Okay.
Because you told me at the time, I know we were talking about it before you wrote it. And then you've told me later that you were pretty adamant that you wanted to self-publish, which very few authors ever go, man, I really want to self-publish more than I want to do. Everybody thinks they want to get, big HarperCollins contract and all that stuff. You told me, no, you wanted to self-publish your book, which was Cancer and EMF Radiation, How to Protect Yourself from the Silent Carcinogen of Electropollution, which ought to be a pretty self-explanatory title for anyone who might wonder what that book is about. But you told me you wanted to self-publish it rather than to seek a traditional publisher. I know why you did it, but tell the audience why you really felt very strongly about that.
Yeah, I never even entertained the idea of going through a traditional publisher for the very simple reason is I wanted complete control over the content. And cancer is obviously a sticky subject. And I just didn't want to go down the road where, in terms of content editing, that there may be changes that I didn't necessarily agree with. And so wanting complete control over it, I mean, even just from an artistic standpoint of wanting to see how the cover is going to look and so on and so forth. That was my road. And I'll give you a small example of how that's even played out in my second book, which I've also self-published. I publish mostly through Amazon and of course through other online retailers, and then also through Ingham Spark for other small bookstores, brick and mortar bookstores. And through the process of publishing through Amazon, you can go through Amazon Marketing Service, which I think what it used to be called now, which is called Amazon Ads, when you can purchase ads and have sponsored products for whatever, in this case, my books. Well, for my second book, I cannot get an ad for the life of me. Every single ad I've tried to do through Amazon has been rejected. And we're talking a simple sponsored product ad with absolutely no copywriting. We're saying that just show someone the cover of the book. And it has been rejected. And I have tried to send multiple emails and phone calls to Amazon ads to figure it out. And the only reason why is because it doesn't fit their content that they feel good about in terms of I'm writing about cancer, in this case now the second book, dealing with stress and mindset. That is against their policy that they can even run an ad for me. So that is, I don't want to say that's censorship because it's a corporation, they can do whatever they want. But at the same token, that was to me, an example of how I really can't even get a word out about my book through a simple ad through Amazon simply because they don't agree necessarily with now, it's probably being triggered by an algorithm looking at the title and the subtitle, right? So we all know that as writers, but by the same token, I can't talk to a real person who can overcome that obstacle. And so that's the kind of thing I actually wanted to avoid from the very beginning. I didn't want to go to a publisher and say, yeah, this is great material, but we'd rather have this as the subtitle or maybe take this snippet of content out. So that's ultimately why I decided to go the path that I did.
I completely understand. I really, really do. Well, with all that in mind, both your original intent and then your current experiences, Are you still committed to going that route for future books, or are you maybe thinking now with this level of background and it sounds like maybe some success,
Yeah, sure.
maybe being more willing to explore going the traditional route?
Yeah, I think I'm open to it. I mean, certainly that's what a lot of authors talk about now as a hybrid model. And the second reason why I think I started off as a traditional, I mean, non-traditional through self-publishing is I didn't have as big of a platform to start with. I had my patient community, which was rather sizable, but not all of them are necessarily engaged readers. And so I was kind of using my first few books here as a way to build up my platform. And then from there, maybe have a bit more that I could pitch to a traditional publisher. I think one of the things I'd be willing to explore, I mean, even right now, which I have no fluency whatsoever, is foreign markets. And I think that's really an untapped potential for a lot of writers is, you've got this great book that's maybe selling well in an English market, but I would have absolutely no idea where to start with, for instance. Now, I have noticed through my sales, particularly my first book, I've noticed quite a bit of sales in Japan and Germany. Now, those are only English speaking people in those countries, but I think that if we can figure out, again, through hybrid models, if there would be other traditional publishing firms that would be willing to pick up a book like that, know the kind, first of all, translate it, and then know the kind of cover and so on, the marketing that would appeal to those audiences, I would do that in a heartbeat. And I think hopefully more options like that exist for us as writers.
Yeah, foreign markets are definitely a challenge. There's a reason agents charge more money to rep foreign markets than they do American markets. It's definitely there's challenges there we don't necessarily have here.
Yeah.
Um, so the key to most any book's success is good editing, regard fiction, nonfiction, whatever. You really do count on having a great both a copy editor and then a content editor. So how did you manage your stated goal of really wanting to make sure that there was real complete control and no massaging or changing of the message, that kind of thing, with the need to also ensure that it was edited really well at the at the highest level and came out with the highest level of professional quality? Did you use an outside editor? Did you hire an editor, or did you have someone? Did you do it all yourself? How did that process work for you?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have an excellent editor that I work really well with. And how that story goes, and this is just maybe serendipitous in my life, but I was doing a little bit of contract writing for a supplement company in the area here in Wisconsin, and so they were buying some pieces for me, and they had at the moment an in-staff editor that they had brought on. And so I'd built a relationship with her. She was editing all my pieces. Now she has since left that company and I don't do any work for them anymore either, but we've retained ties. And so I've retained her as my copy editor. And we work really well together. She understands kind of where I'm coming from. She does point things out in terms of content every now and again, and I take that very seriously. But then as far as further content editing, at least very specifically with both books, I have sought out other people that are professionals in the field. So for instance, for the first book about EMF, I sought out someone who was what's called a building biologist, someone who really does specialize in doing EMF mitigation. And then the person who ended up writing the afterword for the book, Charles Keene, who is again a seasoned EMF inspector, they provided a lot of the content editing as to, hey, you're missing this piece, so on and so forth. With my second book, that ended up being a couple good colleagues of mine, friends as well, who are naturopathic oncologists, people who have been treating cancer as basically their primary career. And so they were able to provide very good feedback. And so in both these instances, I was just lucky to have the right people on board that can do that, to provide the content editing piece. But yeah, for sure. I think you're 100% correct. Editing is the key. And so having a really good copy editor and having some other people that are outside of maybe, I mean, friends and family are great, but they're not going to give you an honest opinion, right? That's the bottom line. So you need someone who's going to be brutally honest with you in terms of content editing to really make it shine. So
well, let me tell you, you already understand the core concept of success in writing. Friends and family are not the ones to get your advice from. It's nice if you need an ego boost, but do not rely on friends and family for for your final
Yeah.
editing. You need someone who's willing to gut you if need be to make sure
Yeah.
that.
And nor do you want them buying your book right away, by the way, because that can throw off your also bots on Amazon. You want to get it out to your community of people who are your hardcore fans are going to buy it first, and so they get associated with other books related in that category and so on. Because it's nice if your aunt buys your book, but it's not, she doesn't buy any other books in that genre, right? So
Right.
you tell your family and friends about the book later, and just kind of try to get your core fans, your super fans, to get it first.
Well, let's talk about your marketing, because I did want to ask you about that, because you've done pretty well by word of mouth. I mean, for for pretty specific topic genre, doing it all on your own. You've really done pretty well. Your sales have been pretty good. So tell me a little bit about whatever your marketing philosophy has been with this, and maybe what else are you considering, or have you considered, and what'd you keep, what'd you throw away? I mean, how's it gone for you with the marketing?
To me, I think of it like a multi-tiered approach. My content marketing is to have my newsletter and to release a blog every month, and so to always kind of keep touch with readers that way. And then as I'm writing new material, maybe to give them little snippets of that to get them interested in it and to pass that along. As far as other forms of marketing, as I just mentioned about Amazon ads, that was pretty hit or miss for me. I've been able to do that successfully with my first book, but absolutely not at all with my second book, despite my efforts. Though I feel like that is a great way to kind of get new readers and to get them engaged. I tried Facebook ads for a while; it just wasn't my thing. I just don't like social media as a platform in general. I've actually just opted out of being on Facebook at all personally. As a personal choice. So I don't feel like that's a good platform for me. But Amazon, I feel like it is the golden goose, because there's obviously people coming there looking to buy a book. That's the reason why they're there, right? So if you can engage them at that point, then that's the key. And then beyond that, always looking at metadata. I mean, I think our books kind of live and die by metadata. As far as sales are concerned, they're well read by their editing, but they live and die by title, subtitle, your synopsis, your cover, all those things. So keep trying to experiment and dial those things in as much as I possibly can, would be the key. And then once the book's out there, once the metadata is kind of plugged in the way that I like it, to me, then I look for outside marketing opportunities. Probably one of the ones I've taken advantage of the most is podcasts. Podcasts within that particular field. So I've gotten interviewed for a lot of people that are in kind of the holistic health world. And I almost inevitably see a spike after one of those in sales after one of those podcasts. I mean, it's fairly reliable. And then as they occur, speaking events, which has been obviously limited as of the last couple of years, but there's still some Zoom opportunities. There's still ways that I've engaged with certain communities. And that could be small to bigger speaking events, but and that's where I'm combining both my history as a practitioner, maybe being able to give a slide presentation now with having this kind of boosted up authority with having a book or two that I've written. So that those worlds emerge at some point.
I think the hard part for a lot of authors, and again, it sounds like you have found a nice sweet spot that works for you. A lot of authors I talk to, especially those who have self-published, the line between business or commerce and just your normal interactions with humans get way blurred, right? Because they never know when to stop trying to market the book, right, and just have a normal human conversation and that kind of a thing, or because it's such a mystery to us. But I have a friend who's a major New York Times bestseller. He's written 9 books that have made the New York Times bestsellers list. He does sports biographies, and he does things like leaving a signed book under a seat at Dodger Stadium, or putting a book in a bookstore, or like he'll find his book in a bookstore and he'll sign it and put a $20 bill in it or something, and just to these little Easter egg things. This guy who sold millions of books. So the marketing thing confounds everybody. And I think if you can find a sweet spot that works for you, where you're comfortable that you're doing enough, but you're not hammering people over the head, I think that unto itself is successful marketing, right? At least from a personal standpoint, you know.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I mean, obviously what I'm writing these books for, my primary honest audience is a cancer patient, and I wanted to make these books very digestible, not too long, easy to read. And so they could just dive right in because, I know what it's like to receive that diagnosis, be overwhelmed. And I wanted to be able to just say, here, just take this little piece, take this book to figure this piece out. Now take this book to figure that piece out, kind of piecemeal it, right? And then read little things as you go along. And so even though my secondary audience might be other holistic providers or medical doctors and such, yeah, again, I have this I try to have this abiding faith that if I put the right marketing out there, the people who need to read it will find it at some point.
Right. I only have a couple more. This last straight up question, which is, now that you've done it a little bit, what advice might you have for someone maybe in your position, a professional who's thinking, okay, I have good stuff to share. I'm not sure how I want to get started. What advice? They say, Brandon, I want to do this thing. I know you've done it. What's the one thing or one or two things that I really need to remember the most when I go to do this?
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind immediately is scratch your own itch. And by that, I mean, these books were born out of my inability to have enough time to share that message with a patient. I might only have 30 minutes to speak with a patient, but I want them to have a broader understanding of this subject. And so, and that's true of my blogs as well. I'm writing something that I don't have time to talk with a patient about. And it's just easier to say, here, read this blog, read this book, because it's going to fill you in. And so this obviously maybe will make more sense with nonfiction than it will with fiction. But if you're a nonfiction writer, scratch your own itch. So you obviously have something to share that is going to fulfill a certain niche, and write it as such. Write it as this is the thing where I'm in the elevator. You really want to understand this concept? Here, just read this book, and then that'll give you everything you need to know. I think we should outline and think about books from that perspective. Because ultimately books are a massive time saver. If you think about it, you've got someone who's worked a year, 2 years, researching all this information, correlating it, consolidating it, putting it in an easy to read format so you can sit down in, hours and get the gist of everything that they've done researching for a couple of years. And so, I mean, to me, that's what nonfiction writing is about, is scratching your own itch. This is the thing that I really need to get out there because no one's saying it quite this way. And then put that in nice, easily, in this, whatever, 8.5 by little package. And then here's your thing. That's everything you're going to need to know about that one subject, or at least the start of it for you in your journey.
Yeah. Well, I like to end on what I intend to be a fun question. I hope is a fun question. So what I offer you here, let's just say I have the magic ability to put you together for a good conversation, dinner, or drink, whatever it is that you want to do with any one of the following 3 people. Tell me who you would choose and why.
Love it. Okay.
And the 3 that I'm going to offer you, I always try to find as disparate a group as I can. So the 3 I'm going to offer you is Dr. William Mayo, who of course is one of the co-founders of the very famous Mayo Clinic, the very famous Chinese herbalist Li Shichen. I think I said that right, Li Shichen. Or maybe someone who you might see as an antagonist, Britt Marie Hermes, the former naturopathic doctor who's become a very anti-naturopathic person. You may or may not even be familiar with her, but one of those 3 is who I could put you together with. Who would you choose and why?
Yeah, I actually don't know the third person, so
good. We'll knock her off the list then.
Li Xishen, then, of course. I have to go true to my Chinese medicine roots and ask some good herbalist questions.
Okay, I thought you might want to probe Dr. Mayo a little bit. I thought that'd at least be a good option, but now,
if I can get both of them together, that would be amazing.
Have a little counterpoint to the various things.
I have to say, Mayo is a fantastic clinic, and they definitely catch things that other medical facilities don't get. I think their thoroughness and their approach, the algorithm they go through in their treatment and diagnosis is fantastic. I think about the Cleveland Clinic as being another exemplary case of that, both of them together. Yeah, it was a really interesting question. But yeah, at the end of the day, though, I'm still a Chinese medicine practitioner. So to sit down with one of the sage herbalists in our field would be quite special.
Okay. Well, hopefully, it would be wonderful if I actually had that ability. I offer people all kinds of stuff. I wish I had the ability to make those things come true. But in the meantime, to everybody, thank you to Brandon LaGreca. If you haven't read one of his books, I highly recommend you do. I mean, whether you're a naturopathic a person who uses a naturopath for your medical care or not, maybe primarily if you're not, I think you could really learn a lot. Brandon's a fabulous writer. These are really well done pieces of information. I highly recommend it. Hopefully you won't read it because you have cancer, but even if you do, or if you know someone who does, it could be a really helpful tool for them in their journey in trying to come back to health. So Brandon, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate you sharing some time and your insights and wisdom on both what you do for a living and this process with your books.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate you as well.
Absolutely. Well, until next time, this is Rich Ehisen for the Open Mic, and we will please come join me again. I suppose another couple of weeks, I'll have another fabulous author to sit down and share insights with. So until then, take care.